Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Hunt, Director of Education and Curator Programs here at MOCA. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for being here, Rodrigo Valenzuela. This is part of a series called Artists on Artists. It's a program that builds on MOCA's tradition of examining artworks and exhibitions through the voice of an artist. It's kind of a, I don't know, double your pleasure, double your fun. Like, you get to see a work of art or a series of works of art through another artist's eyes. And this is why I was particularly interested in bringing Rodrigo to speak on Zoe Leonard's survey. Both accomplished photographers coming from different impulses. And I think we'll get a sense of all of those things as we walk through the show together today. So before we do that, just a few words about Rodrigo and his practice. He was relatively recently named assistant professor in the Department of Art at UCLA. His own work often stages studio scenes and built intervention. We'll see Rodrigo working in a photographic sense, in installation, in video. A lot of it is rooted in architecture, but also addresses some more universal subjects, kind of informed by personal narratives, but I think universal ones as well. So maybe we'll hear a bit more about that as we go through the exhibition. Valenzuela has exhibited his work at the Kitchen, the Drawing Center in New York City, as well as Lightwork in upstate New York, the Frye Art Museum in Seattle, and forthcoming at USF Contemporary Art Museum in Florida. He's been the recipient of a 2017 Joan Mitchell Painters and Sculptors Grant, a 2016 Open Sessions Artist at the Drawing Center again in New York, and in 2014 was awarded the Arts Innovator Award from Artist Trust in Seattle. His work is in the collections of LACMA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, the Frye Art Museum, the Tacoma Art Museum, the Center for Photography at Woodstock in New York, and the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City. He works with Up 4 Gallery in Portland and Cloud and Man here in Los Angeles. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rodrigo Valenzuela.
Hi, thanks for coming. I want to actually start in the first project. Can you guys come with me to the... I also want to start with the project that gave name to the... This is not... Oh, now it's working. Now it's working. Please come closer to the Niagara Falls piece. Because this is the name that give, this is a project that give name to the show, right? Not necessarily the show is named after this piece, but they coincide with sharing. And I think what's important for me to start with this piece because I gotta say, when I just saw this show for first time, I didn't understand it, and I just didn't like it. So I came a couple of times more, and I started thinking a lot about, I tried to give a lot of benefit of the doubt to the work and trying to understand who makes it and try to get deeper into, and a lot of the time, because English is not my first language, when I try to understand things, literally defining them helps you to understand what you're talking about. Like, just finding the definition, and it's as simple as like, I name something, and I try to explain that thing to myself, and then I search for those words that I use to define them in the dictionary, so I can make sense how they work ontologically, what is the root, how I can associate them with something that is familiar to me, right? So I was very curious to know why this show is called Survey and not Retrospective. Right? This is like a series, some of these words go to late 1980s, 90s, the early 2000s. And I think considering that my first impulse when I didn't know anything about the work, when I came to see it I knew about her on other projects. She's been in Documenta, she's been in many big shows, huge shows at the Western Center, at MoMA. I just wanted to know why I can access this work, how I cannot, and the reason why I cannot access is because as an artist, I like to put myself in the shoes of somebody, thinking what it takes to make that work. How do you go to the studio and in some way with the painting, with a person like Laura Owens, you understand the screening, you understand the layers, right? But with this kind of work, you have to understand the layers of the thought processing, which is a lot more inaccessible than plastic issues, right? So thinking about a retrospective would have made it much more clear for everybody to consider what is her perspective, right? You have to understand. So the idea of she addressing this show as survey, as something that is carefully looked, but also at the same time, and that is the definition, survey is looking at something carefully, but also as scanning a piece of land and a piece of territory, right? The cameras, the surveillance cameras are not pointing at you, they're pointing at this a square where you happen to be or the person happened to be, right? So, and that is the most interesting part about this piece is, I mean, the postcards feels like an interesting thing to talk about it, but to me, looking at the table, a workbench, and looking at the geographic placement of the postcards, right? Because if you are working in a place, these postcards could be here, right? They could be facing the place where you are, where the maker is looking at. I don't know if the table goes around, but if in this large of a table, you could go and move stuff independent from your vantage point. And that is something that keeps bothering me about her work, that the absence of vantage point, it is very interesting to me. It's how you subtract yourself so much of the making that you make it feel that it's a universal subject matter. It's something that is very objective. I don't know, do you see that? Or you understand why I'm so troubled by this piece? Because there is a vantage point that is from here and from here. It's not a working table. It's not a table that is a table that's been used to work, but it's with also the placements of the installation, right? So you have, and something that I'm interested in with this piece too, it is that the postcards have, is something that we don't do anymore, not because postcards are not worth anything anymore, but going to a place and collecting these things and send it to somebody when, we have the cell phone, it's immediate, but this symbolizes the leftovers or the excess of that information, right? So you could look at it as these are all the ones that are left, all the places that they were not wanted to be remembered, or the places that they were the most remembered, right? There is no middle point in this, where you can just be there was a lot of this, so they are almost gone, or there were a lot of those, and they all got sold, right? So what is the fascination for the places? And it's something that I try to tell my students a lot about it. This is a good example about the act of making work, or the act of photographing. It's there is so much of that one thing that you don't need to do it anymore, right? It is some company or some person decide to capitalize on the desires in something that can fulfill or read as an objective desire, right? It's you go to France and you want to take pictures of the Eiffel Tower, so just why don't buy the better one, right? You want to do it, but you want to do it yourself. This time it's easier to evidence yourself in it with a selfie, with your own cell phone, send it to somebody, and exchanging this I was there, I was there, I was there, I was there. It's never as look what I saw, right? It's I was there. So you accumulate these images that they are the most democratic way of making art in some way, like just like collecting memories without like taking responsibilities of like who are those memories from, which is like another thing that I keep thinking about this body of work. I mean, in her work in general is like how subtracted she is from the production, right? How much is like she gives you a lot of responsibility to like figure it out, which is a really interesting move. Like I don't want to do it, but it is interesting thing to consider when like you can be making or collecting or accumulating and allow the viewer or allow a curator to take the decisions to like figure out what this means, right? It is a very privileged mentality, but also it's a very like, oh no, I think it's not. I was about to say that it's honest, but it's honest in terms of like we all not know what to do, and we all fake what we're supposed to know what we're doing, and like we just deal with the repercussions that we don't know, and then you learn as somebody called you out, right? So like, and there is a lot more examples about it. I just want to move from. Before I move, do you have any questions about this piece? Does this make sense? It's a weird. It's a good word to start, I think, to like, because a lot of issues I want to talk about her surveillance of the war, right? The surveillance of like how she think about landscape, she thinks about the history of photography and the accumulation of materials. It is very present in all these. You will see it more evidently when you see the tree and there is like a series of photos of the birds, right? There is a lot of, the absence of decision making is very interesting. And at some point it becomes a language of their own, which ties back to the idea of being a writer, or like somebody that's associated with the writer community, with poets and the New York intellectual. It is something to do with like building these images as sentences, or as words, that they are building blocks to say something, right? The problem is a lot of contemporary art is, or like at least in the academic system, you have to know what you're saying, right? It's like, it's so clear. And also when you are like of a minority, you have to have like your discourse very clear. So that is another thing that I'm interested to figure out with her work. It's like, when you go towards universal subject matters, there is something that allows you to be universal, right? There is like, usually that is whiteness. That is like the thing that like allows you to be universal, right? So like, I think there is a lot of issues that I think that are interesting and problematic about the subtraction of like her presence. But can we move to the next room, please? So this is I mean, here there is two very clear examples of that. The mirror pieces are very fascinated about that, about like taking a picture of a mirror, mostly that one that is like dead on, like the camera in front, I see no reflection. It is creepy to like recognize the absence of the maker. Right? Is this more clear now when you see the photos of like a mirror that like there isn't even the house being reflected? Like thinking that you are in charge of like, of those photos, like taking a photo of something round and not have the reflection of the maker in them, it's just so hard. It's just so hard to erase yourself from the equation of making art. That it is fascinating to consider the romanticism that comes from reflecting nothing at the same time. It is very powerful, and they make very striking images. But I keep searching for what is she? Where is she finding this her subjects, right? It's like what is attracting to her, beside the capacity of historicizing anything by the fact that she documents it and she's archiving this as a memories, but as a memories that is like not being selected, it's just being displayed, right? So, which is again, it's very interesting because you can think about like in the way that you put your books and the way that you put your music. I mean, not anymore, but like when you used to have cassettes or CDs, you just put them up. You just put them in the shelf. There is no, unless you have like a OCD, like you just place them there, right? So like there is no very clear categorization of what memories happen first and what memories happen later, right? Are you guys seeing the thing with the mirrors? Are not creepy? That like there is no reflection in the mirrors, and there's like you still don't know, like if you could have walked into X show, and like if you didn't know that I want the president text, you could still don't know the gender, the orientation. You could still would know nothing about the artist, right? And it's just really interesting that happened. Like so far, 2 rooms into it, you don't know that, yeah?
I mean, I think like, I'm curious about this, because like if you see minimal art, you don't know any of those things either. Like I
Yeah.
think she approaches photography from like a very minimalist perspective, but she's using representation. So I don't see how it's like that different than like,
Well,
like there's problems with that in minimalism.
Oh, that is a great comment because it have to do a lot with also where we're at as a like institution. And I'm sorry, MOCA, for like as an institution that recognizes the disappearance of the body as like pinnacle of making art, right? Like if you look at Laura Owen's show, it's about representation. It's like you still don't know anything about like her upbringing, things that like we need to evidence when you're a person of color, things like that. You see this work, you still don't know anything about her. Minimalist, like acting like you belong to the history of art. It is like the thing that would get you into the museums.
Yeah,
It's a fact of behavior, but yeah?
But couldn't you also see that picture as her not seeing herself represented in the space that she's in, that is the absence of herself within this space?
Yeah, that could be a very nice, that could be a much generous reading of me. Like,
offensive for the reflection of the viewer. Like I feel like there's so much space in her works for people to occupy, which makes me feel like they're more democratic sometimes than like something that's representing like a very specific subjectivity.
yeah, I mean, again, I think they're valid, very valid point. I think still from certain perspective is like, who is democracy for, right? That is a big question. It's like considering, like you put like if you consider yourself as the artist that is the mirror, right? It's like also you have to be entitled to consider yourself the mirror, which is like it's an interesting mentality of like being like I am the person that you can be reflected on when you haven't not even present in any house. Like it's something to consider, like in relationship to like when we allow ourselves to take charge of certain places and certain spaces, you also have to be allowed to enter those spaces. And that is something to, I mean, they're like good comment. I think there is a reading of being open, but.
She wasn't like, she's a queer woman, so she wasn't always like feeling comfortable in every institution, like every social space.
Yeah, I mean that was like I would say like so far into the show, like without doing the appropriate research before entering institutions, it's like you have to like figure out how you make yourself present in institutions, and still there is no like a very marked present. Not until the 3rd room, or like 4th room, when you start reading the text that what she wants, literally the text, is like when you understand who she is, right? So you just want to see that part? These things over there. Let's go to the sunroom better. Yeah, let's go to the sun.
Good teacher.
So there is because I don't know how are we doing time. It's pretty good. So again, so right above this room, there is which is where we're going to end. Right, there is a long line of books that they are instruction manuals from Kodak they're called How to Take Good Pictures, right? So if you consider that there is a manual, there is a way, like, well, now you can just set the camera in auto, and the pictures are amazing, right? And you can print them that size with your phone, and they're very good, right? So I think the idea there is a manual, and the manual get updated for the last like 70 years, something like that. The book was printed in like the 40s or 50s, right? And it get updated every year or every 10 years with like what makes a good image, right? There is a point where the technology is just good. So, but you keep publishing books. So what is the good, where the goodness reside, right? Where is the content? And so it's interesting to have the show that is questioning goodness, or the quality of an image right next to something that is so, like, I mean, you can all agree that they are bad photos, right? They're like interesting photos, but they're not the photos that they tell you in school to take. They are not the photos that like you will want to take. They are not the photos that you will want to print. You know, so it's very interesting. This being allowed to be bad too. It's another thing that is really, really interesting, right? Documenting something that for one side is very complicated. It's really hard to document. Also, trying to like document or shoot the very thing that allows you to see other things, right? And the excess of like, you know, the truth or the excess of like knowledge can blind you, right? Like knowing too much is like, or like just like, you can't go straight to the source in some way, right? Like these photos represent that. Like you can't look at the book looking for good photos, right? You can't take this print and like search for that goodness. I think it's more about pursuing that thing that will make you question what other things that the source allow you to see, right? It's like, it is right. It's like reading the dictionary in some way, right? It's like it's just boring to look at the thing. It's just like it's a hard thing. It's not just boring taking a picture of a sun, but it's just like searching for the very thing that defines other things. It is very complicated. It's very hard to make it interesting. It's very hard to make it beautiful, right? Does this make sense? It's like it's kind of like so like having a room full of that, the photos of the sun, the thing that you use to define other things, it is what I'm going with, like searching for the bad photo in some way, searching to like avoid the textbook that she's been collecting. And that is something that maybe we can, let's go to that room and then up so I can show you the pile of books. So you know that guy that sometimes I give to the undergrad the Decisive Moment by Bresson book, right? And it's something that like every photographer gets praised by, that moment, the thing that you decide to take the photo, the thing that makes you a good technically a good photographer. I mean, it's interesting to like, and that is what I think is that sometimes troubles in the amount of entitlement that happens when like you are like just like allowing the viewer to decide for you, right? It's just like there is no one single image that is interesting, but there is something interesting about the accumulation of these words, right? It's keep coming to the idea of like the language, and like every image, every word kind of trying to add one more thing, you know? There is you guys know the thing of the Babel library, the Borges book, right? Like he's trying to find this like infinite books, or like the limit of the books, right? You have a number of words, like in the alphabet, right? It's like A, B, C, D, right? With those 27 letters, you make words that mean something, right? You have like a dictionary with 3,000 words, right? So you have a finite number of words, and you have a finite number of letters. So therefore, there must be a definitive number of books that you can write, right? So like you may run out of literature at some point. So you may run out of images, so you may run out of like I don't know, there's something, I keep thinking about that, kind of like the repetition and then end of meaning, and the generation of new meanings when you repeat something to excess, right? And like, and it's just really hard to grasp like what it means. But you know, it's like, I don't know, I feel tricked sometimes into like thinking that you're supposed to mean something. And it's just like also that I know it must mean something. Like it means something because somebody made it, right? But it's also somebody decide to not take decisions. And I think that is a decision. I don't think it's a curator's issue. I don't think the curator decide to go to your studio and grab a bunch of contact sheet from your table and just place them, right? So I think there is a lot of things that are very enigmatic about like the way that like you evidence yourself as a practice, as a thinker. And I don't know, anybody have like comments about this work? It is really troublesome to me.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear more about the use of language with Zoe, this idea of images as words, sentences become something, even in relationship to your work, Rodrigo, like how you approach making an image and iteration of an image, like how you get to your image, I guess.
Oh, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that because in some way she is looking at this place. If you see, everything is kind of like a very carefully considered the way the vantage point, right? And in my work, I have to say, I remove myself from the act of photographing a lot, right? I set the camera in a tripod and I don't touch it, and I just make things in the studio. So in some way, there is a recording of the performance that happened, of things, of elements that, so every series is like a different possibilities of the same materials to move back and forth, right? So that's why I'm so like, as I was saying earlier, like I'm troubled by this work, and I'd rather talk about something that troubles me than something that is not, you know, like I was talking about some other artists earlier that, you know, it's like you can dismiss some works, and this is just so complicated that because I think it touches the way I work too, that like just go and like insist on something until it generates your own language, right? It's like you build your own, I mean, hopefully in my work I look at the political history or the social use of certain materials, and I use them, I reuse them, I mix them, and I generate meanings depending of like the weight that those materials have, right? So a hammer next to certain thing will add this, they are building blocks for language, right? So, I mean, I would like to have a more understanding about the pigeons or this like dance, and like, but obviously there is a rhythm, right? There is a rhythm into it that is like internal message in some way. The images are talking to themselves, and I think that is something I'm interested in, and it's like wanted to like figure out. But it is true, like looking at my work, there is an arbitrary notion of like just making art that you give value to certain things and to others, and you dismiss other stuff, and then you like mix them and you like persist on them until they start speaking to you. And that, I think that is sometimes very complicated to invite people into that process, unless you like decide to work with like more basic materials. In my case, where like it's 2x4s, clamps, and stones and things that like they are very accessible. It's interesting because during the show at the Whitney, this piece was by the windows, right? Like, so you could see this almost like this landscape being in front of this like window by the Hudson Valley, the Hudson River, right? So the idea of like making a good picture of already making remind you of how to make a good picture in front of what is something like an objective wood picture, right? It's like you have to be so bad like to take a bad picture of that like beautiful view that the Whitney has, right? It's like, so and you're gonna underexpose this, and this gonna look like some mountains, and it's very, very striking images, but like everybody can take that good striking images in that case. So it's very interesting to position the viewer in the case where you tell people, oh, I'm a photographer, I'm a photography teacher, and then people immediately, mostly your aunt or whatever you're visiting from Christmas, want to show you all their sunset pictures. And it's like, the idea of like you can be bad at something is really interesting, right? Like there is a book that tells you that you cannot be bad at something. And then, and again, this is like the problem with where good or bad reside, right? Like what is like, where the strength of an image, then in so many cases, as you saw it in some mannequin pictures downstairs, where they're really quick. Like there's an action of being present, where is enough, and there is an action of being there. But still, there is, I think, those images that you see in the back, they are the most personal images that she have ever printed, I think. And I think it's a photo of her grandmother, they tell the immigration history of her family. And it's interesting connection with like how to make good pictures. Like, right, it's like being in the moment where you like would like to be when actual moments will pass. You need to take good pictures, right? It's like to me it's very strong connection between like I have no time for art yet. Like I just need to make a good picture this time because I need to remember this. I need to remember the clearest I can be. And that is the only time where like you build this connection. In the other ones, like you see pictures of trees, like anybody could have done those trees. So there is an absence of like the impulse, the creative impulse, or the necessity of capturing that moment, right? Which I give it to. I really love that. I really love that there is no urgency. As you hear me for like the last 30 minutes, like kind of like not being happy about like the absence of like this decision making. I love the idea of no urgency too, like just not being in a rush to make something and just accumulating it as words, as you like read and you learn new languages, as like you like accumulate knowledge. It is very telling. So Yeah, this part makes sense? It's like, you see the connections? Like, why I think the most personal part is like place in the time where she's telling you how to take, that is like, it's important to learn to take good images. It is a weird manifestation of like psychological conditions here. Are you happy, Zoe? Why no? What do you mean no? I didn't make the show. I didn't make the show. It's like a whole room of non-creative impulse. So like, what's not my fault? I mean, it's like, yeah. But how do you know that information? You read where? I mean, yeah. No, I. 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 I trying to jump. Yeah, I agree. I think there is not a lot of information to go off on the tree. Like, I mean, I think it's actually for the first entry in the room. It is less than tender. It's very like, it feels, once you know that information become tender, but it is like huge bolts, like touch, like grabbing this piece that is like attached from like many different ways. So. Yeah, I mean, I agree that like, I overlook a lot of things in relationship to like how much information do we need to access the world. I'd rather to focus in my talk about the things that like I can access, right? That is like, there is so much secondary information that like, I think for some, and why I did that is because I think it's very problematic when you work in such a medium that for one side requires you to know a lot of information, but you also are aligning yourself with working class, aligning yourself with like the everyday kind of photographer. But in order to access that work, you need to know so much more. Yeah, I mean, yeah. All right, that's fair. Thank you. And yeah, it's not like a matter of like picking bands. I think it's also, you know, like, so it's an artist. So an artist have several sensibilities. So there is something about like coming, you know, I always say there's like something about like going to a place to think about the work and going to a place to think with the work, right? There is pieces that ask you to think with the work. There is pieces that ask you to think about them, right? In this case, I focus on the ones that were very, to me, the most inaccessible for the capacity of think. You need to think about them and think with them at the same time, like the Niagara Falls and these pieces. To me, they were like the things I would never make as an artist. You know, there's something about the analog. There's not show here, but was at the Hauser when I was showing it here. The trees, the animals. There's something that, you know, I see myself doing. Like it's that photos that they're nice to take. I think to me, to work through and think about the materials that I will never make is something that is like interesting as an artist. This is like an exercise to me. It's about the postcards and this. I'm focused on the things that really create trouble to me, and not denying that they can be mean in all those. I didn't address the black women issues. It's like it's a nice work. It's like it's not like I'm not a docent. I'm not, I'm trying to like think with the work about why somebody ever gonna. I'm trying to make sense out loud in front of you, right? So that is why I decide to avoid these things that they are very like obvious, to like very accessible. To me, it's like very inaccessible, the postcards, because there is so many readings. And these books, it is like there's so many readings that it becomes really inaccessible. Yeah? I never said that she didn't have an opinion. I think there's some evidence herself, which is a very different thing.
Yeah, but that like her subjectivity is distant from the work. Like, how is that like a form of disruption too?
Yeah, I think it's like a very. I don't think as much a disruption. I think it's a strategy. And when I say early, it is a way where institutions allow you to be. You know, like there is, at least they are so heavily curated. Like, I like to get to the point of iconic artists. There is a certain removal of your personality, and I think that is very important to notice in a place where like you can see both shows, and there is a certain coldness in it. Like you may love it, but there is something that it is not screaming like a discord, right? So there is a quietness in both shows that is like very present as a like manifestation of like which is also very, very interesting because, yeah, it's like, Zoe talks about this essay called Why There Haven't Been Great Women Artists. And it is an essay about that, remarking on like all the abstract expressionists, all the minimalists. They are, nobody is like, none of those guys is talking about how much good of a father they are, right? It's like there is a lot of removal of like the thinking that art history is this abstract concept that is not made by people. And I think like the more that like you subtract from yourself, the biggest chance that you have of being in one of these institutions that they are like the gatekeepers of the canon of art. So I think there is those things are present, and I think that like I'm I don't see it as a problem, being very like abstract. Yes, Zoe?
I just think it's interesting that like this idea of distancing, like people feel is like really present in the show. But I see it as more like in the photos of the birds, for example, it's such a bold move, in my opinion, to make that kind of work because it's like very much like I am the author of this really boring performance of birds. I'm the author again in this other contact sheet. I'm the author again in this other contact sheet. Like for me, it's so personal. Like I find that like we all see boring things all the time that are sort of beautiful and wistful in our day to day, and to like record that and be like, actually, I'm just gonna print a contact sheet. It's not even about this singular image being glossy and beautiful in a frame. It's about just this simple act of watching this passage of time and how available that is for everyone. Like everyone gets at some point on this planet has seen birds like fly through the sky, you know? Like that is so democratic. So like it for me is very personal and also very like open.
I appreciate the comment. No, I do. Like, I mean, I think it's a difficult show to like. I don't understand how. You know, I appreciate the comments a lot. Like, there's a difficult to make sense of art, and I think there is like. I think like by creating friction between things that you don't understand, these things become clear, and I think there is some. Trust me, in the last couple of weeks, like reading and like looking at, I kind of learned how to like it more. But I think it's just interesting how much of the role of like, I think these moments are really nice as a like, non-partisan art viewing experiences, right? You know what I mean? Like it's just like I think it's valid. If there are valid points, I think that it's hard for me as an artist to access some of those. But it's like they're not like I wish to have that sensibility to value those contact sheets. But also to me as a like artist of color, I'm thinking who is allowed to like present certain gestures, like very simple gestures, like if a curator goes to art studio and you just don't know which image to show, you're fucked. Like no one will show you work if you are not taking strong decisions, if you are not evidencing yourself every single. So all my critique comes from like artists. It's like where I know that I have to show you something that is good because I will lose you, right? So like to me, like considering like how many decisions we need to take in the everyday life and who is allowed to not take any decisions. It is a trouble, which is not like, I wish to be in that capacity. I wish also to be able to like talk about only about representation, like I'm just like concerned with like surface of paint and just that's it, right? I wish to have like a lot of like being allowed to do a lot of those things, but if you don't evidence yourself, people don't know what the fuck to do with you. And I think there's something that's why I wanted to talk about that work. Like I am in like 4 shows about labor because I'm Latino. I am in like, you know, like I am like in 2 shows about immigration next year.
In the actual art object, in the photograph, like
In
without any explanation of it, like how is that?
that is what I was talking when Amanda asked me about, like, I expose materials that communicate certain social or cultural history, and I associate them with each other, and I generate meaning in the way that, like, I was hoping that the birds would do. Like, maybe there is a musicality, maybe there is a rhythm. That's why I was stuck in the piece. It looks like I'm hating it, but I'm questioning it aloud. The problem is, like, we are in a society that is so fucking partisan that if you don't love anything, you don't create any friction to question things, right? You either love it or hate it. But like, I was like, I am searching for, there is a musicality in those verbs, there is a language, there is like, are there words, are there sentences, are they generate anything? Like, I don't understand it, but I want to understand it. Like, and so like, that is to me, how I created in my word. Like, I don't understand what the birds mean, what is her vantage point. Maybe it's what the moment at, where she's looking at is become meaningful to notice the pass of time. To me, it's more about like grabbing 2x4s and grabbing some cast materials I do, like, you have seen them. Like, so to me, that is like, the part that intrigued me more is like the privilege of not taking decisions is a huge decision, is a huge privilege. Yeah, Anna?
And it's like real,
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like the white cis male making this work.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, a lot of the works that you're critiquing are the ones that are like about kind of collecting or like from an anthropological perspective,
Yeah.
like, and not about her. So and you're calling that like collecting way of showing work as like to be entitled because it's not directly about her. It's about like her
Yeah.
her collections.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, if you think because artists who are like that entitlement of like being able to show your collection is not an equal, like person of color's collection would be talked about probably in terms of their identity.
Yeah.
And I think hers probably is too, that she's like a queer woman, like the show is spun in that direction. But I'm wondering if you think like people should have to show more in their work, like do something more and not have it be about a collection, like they should show themselves, like across the board. Like people of color should have to show themselves. White people should have to show like who they are making this work. Or if you think like maybe the ability to show your collection should be okay and not like people of color should be able to show their collection too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good question because there's as we all probably think about how horrifying could be to anyone to walk inside our house and look at our collection of anything, right? Not the things that you edit. Just like if somebody could just like walk inside your house, look at everything that describes you as a person, right? And then just like look through your computer, look at your books, look at you like, under your bed. And all those are technically objects that define you, right? So like you have a bunch of exhibitions that they're like the house of this guy or the house of this person, and they're like, so I think there is, and because we all have the fear of like somebody walking inside the room uninvited and like look at all this shit and then like trying to define you by all the things that you have, I think there is a process of editing that you come to a museum and like and evidence certain stuff and show certain stuff. There is an editing that happened where you assume that this is like a purely intellectual gesture, right? I don't think people should, as a like mass, to be allowed to, but there is, I think there is a lot of work that things go through when you have made it enough a part of you like everyday activity. And I think a lot of things in the accumulation, they are not as clear as in some of the photos. In some of the photos, you know who she is, and you evidence a lot of like her like political tendencies and gender and race and class. I think in a lot of the accumulation is so much coded with something else that is just like really hard to decode who are then. And it's because I think in terms of that as accumulation is all the things that you accumulated, but literally all the things that you have accumulated. Which are those, all the things that you're thinking about that you have a lot in your house are art, are an object that is they have a cultural value and represents you. And it's just really hard to me to like think which ones are those. I think it's possible to make good art about it. I just think it's like, I don't think necessarily it's part of the, you should evidence certain limits. I mean, still, I think privacy is interesting, and like, and keeping the secret of who you are is very interesting. But for that, you need to be invited to know that there is also a secret. You know, like there is no like it can be a secret. It makes sense. I think we're out of time. But it's nice conversations. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Zoe. What am I called? No more questions? No, Karen? Thank you, Karen. All right, thank you.